going to show you how to make a egg and tomato aubergine curry from scratch, from using all fresh ingredients and spices. Once you've used this sauce and mastered this sauce, you can adapt it for all sorts of things. You can put chicken in it, you can make it other vegetables, but it is a really tasty curry sauce that doesn't rely on either a ground up mix of spices or a jar. And then you've got all the spices for the future, and they're the basis of most curry powders anyway. Okay, so I've chopped 2 large onions, and I'm just going to add to it finely chopped garlic, which I sort of slither away. Two large cloves, but I didn't have large ones, so I've got 3 with a small one. And then we're going to fry this in 2 tablespoons of cooking oil. Large saucepan, ready to fry. So my cooking oil is in the pan, just warming that through, and I'm going to add the onions to gently begin to fry. You don't need to brown them, we just want them to be softened. Shake them along and leave them on a medium heat for about 5 minutes. While the onions are cooking, I'm going to peel and chop an aubergine. So in the old days, you used to have to soak aubergines in salt to get out bitter juices, but you don't have to do that anymore. And if you see a recipe that says you do have to do it, apparently they've bred that out of modern day aubergines. So I just slice it down into slices all the way through, about 1/2 centimetre thick, maybe a bit less. Then cut it into fairly small chunks. Actually, I'll take both ends off and do the middle bit. So again, slice it through, centimetre chunks, a bit less perhaps, finely chopped. Now if you don't like aubergine, or your children don't like aubergine, then you can, this is when you can add other vegetables that you prefer. So you could do this certainly with courgettes, you could do it with peppers, really nice with peppers, anything with tomatoes, red peppers, green peppers, work well, mushrooms. I would not probably do it with carrots, I think they're quite a strong flavour. You could put sweet potato in here. You could avoid the eggs altogether and make it a chicken curry, and that's when it's really good for leftover cooked chicken, maybe from a roast. That would, flavours would be nice with that too. So this is fairly adaptable tomatoey sauce to make a basic curry that you can turn into whatever suits you and your family. So I'm going to add the aubergine now. As you can see, I've only just cut it and it's beginning to brown a little. Don't worry about that, but it doesn't make any difference to the quality of what you produce, but it does begin to brown up a bit like apples do when they're in the air. So we get it in with the onions and get those to gently soften and brown a little in the oil. They take up a lot of oil. You can add more if you want to, but you don't need to add oil because we're going to add tomatoes. Stir that round, continue to cook that for another 5 minutes, and we'll get together all our spices to be added. I'm now going to assemble the spice mix. In here I've got 2 teaspoons of ground coriander, here 1 teaspoon of cumin, a teaspoon of ground ginger, a teaspoon of turmeric, 1/2 teaspoon of chili powder, and that's hot, but you could use a less hot one if you want to, and it's purely to taste, teaspoon of paprika, and salt to add to it. So I'll mix all these together in this one container and then we'll add them on. Softened the vegetables, they've taken up all the oil, and now I'm going to add the spice mix. Do that off the heat because you can very easily burn spices. So that nice mix now, smell is beginning to come through. I love this smell. That's all beautifully mixed there. I'm going to put it on to a gentle heat just for a couple of minutes, and then I'll add the tomatoes. Just want to cook, always handle the spices quite gently because they can be spoiled by overcooking. Right, so I've just let that all blend in. Now I'm going to add the tin of tomatoes and our tomato puree. So again, I tend to buy the whole tomatoes and just chop them up as I'm putting them in. You can buy chopped tomatoes, convenience. So give that a bit of a stir, and then I shall add tomato puree, and we need 3 good tablespoons of tomato puree. I've added the tomato puree, 3 good tablespoons, and I also I rinsed out the tin with water to get a bit more liquid. So this is again a bit of a judgment and personal taste. You want that consistency which is thick enough to be able to coat the eggs as we put them in. So this has been now cooking for about 10-15 minutes on its own, but I'm now going to add the eggs to that. If you want to add more tomato and make it a more runny sauce, then you can add more tomato puree to give more depth to the sauce. I'm now going to add 4 hard-boiled eggs. Now I'm just making this for a couple of people, to have 1 egg each with aubergine. If you want more eggs, that's fine. But I've hard-boiled my eggs for about 10 minutes and then left them in cold water. So now they're cold, and what I'm going to do is just gently slice slivers that don't even, when it touches the yolk inside you stop. You're just slicing through the white. And this then allows, when we put this in this sauce, it allows more sauce to be absorbed into the eggs. So basically like that, gentle cuts all the way around, so it's a bit like a concertina. Ready to add the eggs. Just give it a good pinch of salt before you put the eggs in. Final stir. And then we'll just lay the eggs on top of the sauce. And then just gradually build up the mix over the top of the eggs. Be very gentle and careful not to break the eggs. And that can go down on the lowest heat. Cover it with a lid and let that simmer away for about 15 to 20 minutes, and that's ready to go, ready to serve. So while the egg and aubergine curry is cooking, I'm going to show you how to make an Indian style bread, which is quite often what people in India eat instead of rice. They don't eat bread and rice together, they either eat one or the other, and then they soak up all the juices with the bread. This is a very simple bread. It's fried, but it's not as doughy as naan. It's more like a roti, which is a thinner Indian bread. Not quite a chapati thinness, but actually pretty thin. But it's so simple. It's just flour, salt and water. I'll show you how to make that. This is 9 ounces, 250 grams of plain flour, good pinch of salt, no, that way. Just mix that a little. And then I'm going to add enough water to make a fairly sticky dough, which is what we want. So it is a case of gradually, I'll do it in tablespoons and see how many we need. So 1, 2, 3, I'm going to use 4 and start to mix that. And when you practice this a bit, you get a feel for it, because in a minute, we do this all by hand, we're going to have to get in there and blend it with our hands. Actually, it's a little bit dry, so another tablespoon. So that's 5 tablespoons to that amount of flour. That I think feels like it. half a tablespoon. Should do it. Okay, so now I'm going to put my hands in. So what you get is a fairly soft dough. Just pull it all together and incorporate all the dry flour from around the edges. And if you feel that could need a bit more water, it does feel a little bit dry to me at the moment, but it is coming together. And in many ways you don't want it too wet because it tends to be a bit harder if it goes too wet. It is one of those things you gradually judge, but even if you make a bit of a mistake with it and it's a bit hard, it's quite nice to have it hard because then you can scoop up more of your dinner. And you can always cook rice as well with it too. So that's what we end up with. And we just need to shape it into a ball. Don't really need to knead it. The kneading is just basically when you pull back the dough and keep incorporating it. Okay. So I'll break off pieces for each person you want to cook for. So this will probably make 4 decent sized breads. And roll it into a ball. Keep on incorporating it with your fingers until you get about that stage. And again, you can vary the size of these. For children, you may not want a big one. You can double the amount of flour and make piles of them. I'm going to roll these out individually now with the rolling pin. So I'll use a little bit of flour to dust the surface. And if you haven't got a rolling pin, you can actually do this just by pressing down, and I'll show you one that you can do without a rolling pin. Make it into a rough round shape. A little bit of flour on the rolling pin is quite helpful, stops it from sticking. And then just gradually ease it out, keep turning it. And again, you can vary this to the size you want. You know, if you use a lot more flour, you could make more, you could have thicker dough. This will make a thin bread. And that's about enough for one. So you must then look at this and think, right, is that enough for my family? I might need more. And what you often people do when they're making these is just turn them from one side to the other. I'm not quite sure of the science of this, but it is something that you often see people doing in India. And then they just throw the bread onto a really hot pan. So I'm going to get the pan going now with the oil for the first bread. So I'll show you how to make one of the breads without using a rolling pin if you haven't got one. Basically, you just use the palm of your hand and just ease it down. I've got a very noisy surface here. And you can just press it out as far as you want it to go. It may be that you get slightly thicker ones. Again, turn it over. So you're just being like a rolling pin with your hand. That's not too bad, actually. I'm just basically stretching it out. Who needs a rolling pin? And then the same process of just pulling it gently as you flap it from hand to hand. You are activating the gluten, I understand, in the flour. Right, so that's not too bad. It's slightly thicker than the other one, but if you've got the patience, you can stand there working that as thin as you want it to be. So I've now heated the oil in the pan at quite a high heat. You really want it to sizzle as the bread goes in. So lay your bread in gently, and you can see already it's sizzling at the edges. A nice flat pan is a good idea. It's got a slight raise in the middle of mine, but that's okay. Hot is good. And you can begin to see the bubbles coming up in the bread as it cooks. That's a good sign. Right, just a couple of minutes for this. It doesn't take long. Ease it around. Hopefully, if you have got a hot area, yes, that seems to be particularly hot there. Just watch it sizzle and the bubbles coming through, which is very pleasing. That should be ready now. You can see how many bubbles are across the whole of the surface. I'm going to turn it over. Be careful with the fat spitting. And there you have a nice crispy bread. Just a couple of minutes on each side and that's done. You can then put it out onto a kitchen towel, and you can make a stack of these and keep them warm in the oven if you want to for everybody, or you can have 2 pans on the go. I mean, it seems a bit labour intensive, but there's hardly any cost to this. It's a really convenient way of just having everything to hand. You haven't got to go out and buy expensive supermarket produced bread.